There's something about Resident Evil that has always gripped me, from the eerie mansion halls of the first game to the haunting Spanish villages of Resident Evil 4 to the terrifying Louisiana swamps of Resident Evil 7. The franchise has always been a constant in my gaming life. It isn't just about survival horror, it's about atmosphere, tension, and the mix of camp and dread that only Capcom could pull off. But for me, there's one game in the series that often gets brushed to the side, ignored, or even laughed at, and that's Resident Evil Dead Aim on the PlayStation 2. Dead Aim isn't a game that people bring up often when they're talking about the series. It's not celebrated like RE2, nor is it divisive in the way RE6 is. Instead, it sits in this strange middle ground, half forgotten, half misunderstood. And yet, despite its quirks, despite its departure from the series norms, I can't help but have a soft spot for it. Dead Aim might not be the crown jewel of Resident Evil, but it's a game that still means a lot to me, and even today, I can honestly say it's still fun to play. To really understand Dead Aim, we have to rewind to the early 2000s. Resident Evil was in an exceptional phase. The mainline games had established themselves as the kings of survival horror, but Capcom was also branching out with spin-offs, trying to see what worked and what didn't. Among these experiments was the Gun Survivor series, first-person, light gun-style shooters that never quite landed the way the main games did. Dead Aim, released in 2003, was technically the fourth entry in that series, but unlike the others, it wasn't just a straightforward on-rails shooter. Instead, it attempted something ambitious, blending third-person exploration with first-person combat. That hybrid design immediately set it apart from its spin-off siblings and made it something more memorable. And here's the important part. This was all happening right before Resident Evil 4 would come along and completely reinvent the franchise. In a strange way, Dead Aim feels like a bridge. It's as if Capcom was testing the waters, asking, what if Resident Evil wasn't just fixed camera angles and tank controls anymore? While Dead Aim never got the recognition RE4 did, you can't deny its role as an experimental stepping stone. It belongs to that weird pocket of Resident Evil history where Capcom was willing to try anything, even if the results were awkward, clunky, or destined to be forgotten. Dead Aim's biggest claim to fame is its unusual gameplay structure. When you're exploring, the game uses a third-person perspective, but the moment you pull out your gun, the camera snaps into first person, putting you directly into the action. By today's standards, it feels rough, but back then, it was strangely refreshing. In third person, you could scout and move with relative freedom. In first person, you were vulnerable, locked into aiming while the threat closed in. That rhythm, that back and forth, made encounters unpredictable. It wasn't polished, but it was memorable. And then there's the setting. Dead Aim takes place mostly entirely on a massive cruise ship drifting at sea. That choice of location is brilliant. A mansion in the woods or a police station in the middle of a city might feel isolating, but a cruise ship in the middle of the ocean, that's isolation on another level. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, just endless metal corridors and infected passengers turning luxury into terror. The characters reflect the spin-off nature of the game. Bruce McGivern, the American anti-bioterrorism agent, is a generic action hero archetype. He's not Leon, he's not Jill, he's, well, Bruce, but in that way, it works. He almost feels like the kind of disposable hero you'd find in a B-movie, and that matches the energy of Dead Aim perfectly. Pair him with Fong Ling, the Chinese secret agent with a cool, calculated personality, and you get a duo that's fun to watch, even if they never reach the iconic status of the series' usual stars. The villains lean into camp. The monsters are grotesque in that classic Resident Evil way, and the overall vibe is pure survival horror pulp. Dead Aim might not have the strongest narrative, but its atmosphere is undeniably effective. To this day, I still remember the creaks of the ship, the eerie silence before an encounter, and the strange unease of being trapped on a floating tomb. So why does Dead Aim matter? Why, out of all the Resident Evil spin-offs, does this one still stick with me? Part of it is nostalgia. I played almost every Resident Evil game, from the classics to the remakes, but Dead Aim stands out because it feels like this hidden corner of the series, one that only a handful of fans truly appreciate. When I first played it, I had no expectations. I didn't think it would rival the mainline entries, and maybe that's why I was able to enjoy it for what it was. It surprised me. It wasn't perfect. It was strange, clunky, and sometimes laughable, but it had heart. Dead Aim is the kind of game that reminds me why I love Resident Evil, not just because of its iconic moments and blockbuster hits, but because of the risks Capcom was willing to make along the way. Without these experiments, without these oddballs, Resident Evil wouldn't be the franchise it is today. Even now, when I revisit Dead Aim on my PS2, I find myself smiling. The controls might be dated, the graphics might show their age, but the game still has that spark, that sense of vulnerability, of atmosphere, of being trapped in a nightmare. That's pure Resident Evil. And honestly, it's still fun. Dead Aim deserves more recognition, not because it's a masterpiece, but because it dared to be different. It's a scrappy survivor, an underdog, and for me, it holds a permanent spot in my Resident Evil collection, both on my shelf and in my heart. At the end of the day, Resident Evil Dead Aim isn't the best Resident Evil game. It's not the scariest, it's not the most polished, and it's not the most memorable in terms of mainstream impact. But for me, it holds a special place in my heart. It's the kind of game that reminds me why I love Resident Evil. Not just because of the blockbusters or the iconic characters, but because of the risks, the oddities, and the forgotten gems that make the series feel alive. Dead Aim might be an oddball, but it's my oddball. And even today, when I load it up and step onto that haunted cruise ship, I'm reminded of just how much fun Resident Evil can be when it isn't afraid to get weird. So here's to Dead Aim, the forgotten survivor, the awkward experiment, the game that refuses to be erased from my memory. It may not be perfect, but it's still a hell of a ride. Thanks for watching.